What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel Anime Fiction. I'm back with a new episode of What If Naruto Was the King of Chaos Part 3. And if you did enjoy the video, give this video a like, and if you're new to my channel and like my content, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more crossover fictions. Now let's begin this new video.
Chapter 12. In general, Reveria stood there watching Naruto fight the Hellhound, who appeared to be nothing more than a rabid dog with a bad temper in his eyes. When it charged at the boy, Naruto would simply hop over it at the last second, enraging the beast even more. "You should be killing it," Reveria pointed out. "I understand, but I'm curious as to why you call it a Hellhound. Surely it can't just be because it spews fire from its mouth? That is supposed to be the reason why." Naruto landed close her, facing the Hellhound, which hissed at being teased and dug the ground with its foot, ready to pounce again. "But its flame appears to be weak. How does that justify having hell in its name?" "Because hellhounds are notorious for killing adventurers in the middle floors with their magical flames. A level 1 should not be here, but you appear to be an exception." Reveria groaned. Naruto mumbled, "I can't imagine those adventurers were very strong back then." "That is what is known as arrogance, young man. Allow those flames to hit you, and you will understand why they are so lethal to level 1 and 2s.
All right then, Naruto murmured as he took a step forward and dropped his protections.
Reveria was taken aback by his bravado. "Wait. I didn't mean it that way."
Reveria could only stare in shock as a barrage of hot flames rocketed towards the boy and engulfed him completely. Immediately, the fear of his death bloomed in her heart, and the Hellhound seemed to grunt oddly, as if chuckling at finally catching the boy who had been making a mockery of him earlier.
"Naruto," exhaled Reveria. "Pathetic," he said, which astonished both her and the creature.
The flames were violently extinguished, exposing Naruto standing uninjured, arms folded. "Is that the flame you're famous for? I'm not impressed," he stated plainly, raising his palm, and lightning flowed from it, striking the hound and electrocuting it to death.
Reveria stepped forward and yanked his hair violently. "Ow. Why?" He massaged his chin. His level 5 strength was nothing to scoff at.
"That was a ridiculous thing to do. But I warned you that the flames were too weak. See, it had no effect on me. However, what if it had? You can't perform such thoughtless things in the dungeon just to put a monster's talents to the test."
"I understand. But because I am an elemental wizard, I knew those flames couldn't hurt me." "And that's another aspect of you that I'll have to research," Reveria said, holding her face. "A human who can summon elements without the use of magic circles or chants. How is that even possible?" I just imagine who I want to cast and that's it."
"Is that it? What exactly do you mean by, that's it?" Magic is a vast and difficult subject that requires many years of scholarly study to master, with no magic circles or the requirement for a proper chant. How did you manage to do something like that with no clear academic experience in the subject?
"Because of what my master taught me." "Really? And what else did he instruct you on?"
Well, he taught me that chants are more of a hindrance to a mage than a help.
"Chants are what assist a caster better visualize their spells. How are they harmful?"
That was exactly the reason. Chants are intended to aid in visualization, however they are time-consuming. I could murder a magician in the time it takes them to chant. Concurrent chanting is a unique experience. But my master reasoned, why focus on chanting when you can train your mind to help with conjuring spells?
"How did that go?" "I simply have to imagine a flame in as much detail as possible while channeling magical energy, and it appears, like so." A flame danced on his palm. Reveria attempted the same thing, closed her eyes and imagining a blazing flame, but nothing happened. "It's just not working for me. Time is required. It also depends on how you envision your flame. How do you picture it? How else might you perceive fire?" For a few period, Naruto folded his arms and contemplated. "Well, when I first started out, I used to imagine a log fire and focus on how much wood it took to fuel it. The more wood I envisioned putting in, the brighter and more powerful I imagined the flames to be. My fire magic became more strong as a result of that image." Reveria lowered her hand and listened closely. She'd never heard of such a casting method before, and as simple and reasonable as it sounded, she couldn't perform it, despite being an infamous magician. That is certainly an unusual approach. Are you certain it isn't due in part to your innate magic? I suppose it may be. If you can't perform what a mage at your level can, then I suppose that casting procedure is unique to me. Yet your master gave you so much direction on it. He must be a very knowledgeable man, Reveria replied, gently pushing at the subject of this mysterious person Naruto seemed to be referring to. If he had been lying, Loki would have caught him, so he was telling the truth. However, what was more surprising was Naruto's reaction to the subject. He scoffed and turned away from her. That bit is undeniably correct. He's also a selfish jerk who acts without regard for the repercussions. You appear to be resentful for someone who has provided you with so much knowledge to defend yourself.
I've got my reasons, Riveria. Please don't ask me any more questions, he added quietly.
Of course, Reveria replied, despite the fact that her curiosity had not been satisfied.
This child had done far more than any new adventurer should be capable of. A few floors back, they came across a silverback. Expecting this monster to be a little more powerful and something that would take Naruto a little longer to deal with, she instructed him to face it with his sword.
But, rejecting her warnings, he went forward and ducked, slipping through the monster's legs, hopping on its back, climbing up to its head, and gouging out its eyeballs with his own hands. Naruto got off the monster's back and waited for it to regain its bearings before using its sense of smell to search out the boy and growl at him.
She'd waited for him to draw his sword this time, but instead, he conjured an icicle that looked deathly sharp even from the distance she was standing at, and with a full swing of his arm, he'd thrown it like a spear down the monster's throat as it roared at him. It thrashed around in the floor, suffocating, before Naruto jumped in the air and landed by punching down on its throat, jerking for a moment before going still and disappearing in a puff of smoke. She'd seen cruel ways of executing a monster, but that wasn't something a little boy would do. As if to justify his actions, he'd told her, it doesn't matter how powerful a monster is, as long as it has a need to breathe, then it can die via simple methods instead of cutting it down and expending the extra effort.
Naruto's mind seemed to work differently than other adventurers, and his unique powers seemed to allow him to think the way he did.
Because he'd drawn his sword for the first time when they came across a wyvern a few minutes after killing the silverback, instead of rushing towards the beast and attempting to cut it down, he'd slashed the air with his sword, causing a powerful shock wave to rush towards the airborne monster. Instead of killing it right away, as she'd expected, he'd been concentrated on removing its wings, one of which was practically cut, hanging on by a shred of skin. Without the ability to fly, the creature sank to the ground in a trance. And that was the moment Naruto had been waiting for, because as soon as it landed, he jumped on its neck and thrust the blade of his sword into the back of the creature's head, just enough for the wyvern to start kicking and throwing its head around to knock the boy off.
Naruto, on the other hand, held on tight and slammed a fist down on the sword's handle, finally piercing the skin and reaching something he called the brainstem, invoking what she possessed, however, was lightning magic. He shouted, "Lightning King Iron Hammer," and sent arcs of lightning coursing throughout the monster's body.
The wyvern spasmed violently for a few seconds before exploding into a puff of smoke. Speaking with him afterwards revealed that it had not been magic, but a sub-ability of one of his subsidiary skills, Thunderbolt. The strange way his fauna operated seemed to be the primary reason why he was so exceptional at killing monsters that should have been above his level. Say, Naruto, do you have any experience fighting monsters?
Yes, I do, in fact. They used to be released on me by my lord. To survive, I had to kill them. It cost me a lot of money, blood and a large portion of my sanity, but over time, I acquired broad weaknesses and behaviors that I could apply to any monster that was around. Reveria agreed, thinking that if Naruto had previous experience killing surface monsters, it would explain why he took to murdering them so well down here in the dungeon. I see. You didn't have a typical childhood, did you?
No, certainly not. Then respond to me, Naruto. Why are you so obsessed with fighting? It is obvious that the abilities you have honed are the consequence of extensive training. The swordsmanship and calculated thinking you possess are the consequence of rigorous training and a desire for greater strength. What is your goal in all of this?
Naruto fixed his gaze on her. It's a little early to be asking me that, isn't it?
It is a question that must be asked at some point in one's career. And the solution is something we can use to assist you. So, what is it?
Naruto stood motionless for a moment, unsure what to say.
I just need to get stronger. But I can't tell you why.
What's the harm? I'm not ready to share that with you yet. I'm not ready to just pour out my heart.
Riveria gripped his shoulder, irritated that she couldn't make eye contact with him since the blindfold was in the way. After all, the eyes usually revealed a person's inner thoughts and intentions. Well, you're now a member of the family. It's fine if you don't want to inform us right away. But please know that we are here to listen to you.
Naruto looked at her, perplexed. What? She inquired. I was hoping you'd push the subject a little further. Don't worry. Riveria said with a smile. You are not the first member of the familia to have a troubled past. We will not bother you about it. However, you must ensure that you have a clear goal for yourself. Those who entered the dungeon just for the purpose of power did not survive. Naruto smiled at her, partially because she was sincere and partly because he was relieved that he wouldn't have revealed his secret anytime soon. The wall near them suddenly blasted outwards as a brown-furred beast surged through, standing 3 meters tall with the head of a bull and brandishing a bone sword. It shook itself and searched its surroundings with its burning red eyes before locking upon the two adventurers, snarling as drool flowed from its mouth and rushing towards them with heavy footfalls, its sword drawn.
This is the monster I wanted you to fight, the Minotaur. Naruto looked at down as the floor shook slightly from its footsteps. That object appears to be quite tough. Are you sure that's what I should be dealing with right now? No, to be honest. I've broken a few rules by taking you thus far into the dungeon on your first day as a level 1. However, you've repeatedly displayed strength and abilities above your level, so I thought it was appropriate that a true level 2 monster like this was what you needed to feel the strain of a fight.
It appears to be tough. Any advice before I start? Naruto said, pulling out Liber.
Its hide is tough and difficult to pierce. Its strength stats are at their peak level 2, making it a nightmare for anyone who isn't strong enough to confront it. In terms of combat abilities, subpar. But given your current reach, it should be a bit more difficult. I'm not staying short for long. I'll grow up and be taller than you someday, Naruto huffed as he approached the beast. Sure. Wait a minute. Alright, big guy, show me the beef in ya, Naruto called back to her as the beast finally reached him and stared down from its tremendous height. The Minotaur narrowed its eyes before roaring loudly, the sound of its howl booming throughout the long corridor they were in, causing the air to tremble with the weight of its voice, but Naruto remained steadfast. A Minotaur's scream would normally paralyze a low-level adventurer, but not Naruto, who was clearly above such a rung on the power ladder. Riveria took note of this and stood back to watch how this combat would unfold.
The Minotaur swung down, using all of its strength in the attack, catching Naruto off guard for the first time. Just in time, he managed to lift Liber up and block the weapon in its hand, sparks flying off from the collision of the blades as the two struggled for dominance. Naruto clenched his teeth and gripped Liber with both hands, irritated that the Minotaur was only using one hand, which he couldn't do because he was too small at the time. You've got a lot of muscle on you. I'll give you that, he murmured through his clenched teeth, but it's nothing compared to my master's or mine. Naruto used more of his might to push up, and the Minotaur stumbled back a little. The monster tightened its other hand and surged forward, aiming to smash its fist into the boy's face, enraged at being forced aside by such a little youngster and with its sword arm not in the appropriate place. As the blow smashed into the ground and broke off a few rocks, Naruto leaned out of the way and slashed that arm with Liber, cutting deep into the skin and making the Minotaur yell in agony and wrath. It took a little step back and grasped its trembling arm, holding its fist hard and gritting its teeth as it tried to withstand the pain. TCH, that attack was designed to sever your entire arm. I guess you're a tough one, Naruto murmured, holding Liber aloft as he waited for the thing to attack again.
It charged again, this time swinging its sword sideways. Naruto could see the air pressure created by that swing and knew it would not be a good idea to step away, so he bent his body backward enough for the weapon to swing by above him, then kicked upwards with both his feet, smashing his soles into the chin of the Minotaur. While it rattled the beast's face, the Minotaur bared it and utilized the energy of the previous swing to bring it round and over its head for a vertical downward slash, aiming to chop Naruto in half, but Naruto rolled out of the path as the blade cut into the rock and hopped to his feet. Jumping at the monster from the side, he kneed it in the side of its face severely, breaking off a few of its teeth, then spun around in the air and sliced outwards with lever, taking out the creature's left eye as a reflex. Naruto couldn't avoid it because he was in midair, and Lieber was stretched too far out to execute a full counter in time, so he took that foot right to the stomach and was sent careening backward into the rock face, embedding deep in it.
Naruto. Are you okay? Reveria cried, her team poised to intercede. She was expecting a response and for him to quit after being severely booted into the wall, so she was surprised when he smiled with his teeth stained with blood. Yeah. That's what I'm looking for, he rasped before vaulting out of the hole in the wall and rushing the Minotaur before it could orient itself.
The Minotaur was forced to drop its weapon and stumbled back screaming in its guttural voice as it clutched at the near stump its hand was left in with its other injured arm that was pouring blood from the wound further up near its elbow. Naruto persisted, cutting deep wounds into the monster's abdominals and chest as it lunged forwards and swung its fist outwards in an attempt to sweep the boy off his feet, but Naruto simply ducked under and slid through its legs as he'd done with the silver back.
Reveria hadn't lost sight of him and watched in awe as the entire length of Naruto's blade was suddenly coated in bright orange flames, and Naruto slashed once down the Minotaur's spine, filling the air with the stench of burnt meat. Naruto kicked the monster in the $1 and sending it flying forwards onto its face, his stomach rumbling slightly. Smells like premium Wagyu, which I haven't tasted in a long time, he thought hungrily. Hello, Reveria. Do you think you can eat monsters? She looked at him, shocked and slightly disgusted. How could you? Well, technically, a Minotaur is a cow, at least in part. Doesn't it make sense that it could be edible?
That is what you think of in the heat of battle.
I just like steak, Naruto shrugged, while Reveria shook her head in disgust before deciding to answer the stupid question.
I'm not sure, maybe. I've never attempted it. Something to think about after that, Naruto grumbled as he readied his blade again, having booted the Minotaur back to its weapon, which it was now standing within its good left arm.
It roared louder than ever before, rushing Naruto and swinging downwards with all the might it could gather, and a bell chime could be heard. Naruto laughed and simply sliced outwardly a bit, and a bell chime could be heard. The assault was redirected back at the Minotaur, severing the entire right arm at the shoulder, causing it to fall to its knees, flailing its head around in agony, and it glanced down to see Naruto right in its face, temporarily stopping its howling. It's okay, Naruto said softly, patting its cheek. I've been there before. The Minotaur's brow twitched in rage as it snarled, dropping equal parts slobber and blood from its mouth now filled with jagged tooth stumps. Naruto smiled softly like a parent comforting a child before slapping the Minotaur hard in the place where he'd been patting it. The Minotaur careened into the same rock face it had kicked Naruto into before. For some reason, Reveria, I feel physically stronger. Do you have any ideas why? You may be already increasing your strength stats in this fight because it has more physical attacks than magic attacks, she reasoned. Cool. It's time to finish this, then, he said, zoning in on the Minotaur as it sat up deliriously, launching forward, thrust the blazing sword into its throat, and held on as the Minotaur clutched his arm in a futile attempt to stop him. Naruto simply steeled his face and aggressively pulled the sword around a little, damaging and burning everything in the Minotaur's neck before forcibly ripping the blade out, coughing up more blood before its chin collapsed to its chest and it vanished in a puff of smoke. The core tinkered on the floor and came to rest at Naruto's feet, breathing fiercely as he glanced to his companion for an assessment, clapping her hands slightly as she approached him. Excellent work, Naruto. That monster was an obvious challenge for you, as I expected, yet you outperformed my expectations. Thank you. I'll heal you up right now, she murmured, raising her staff aloft as she noticed blood pouring down his chin. Not necessary, he said, holding a hand in front of her before putting his other hand to his face, and Reveria felt a comforting warmth emanate from him as the scuffs and scratches, as well as the blood, completely disappeared from his face and arms as his breathing became more relaxed. Do you also have healing magic? Mine, but yes. I can even heal myself using what I call light magic. How many magical abilities do you possess? More than you realize, and what's more, I'm still learning. Riveria stood transfixed in wonder before motioning to the flaming lever in his grasp. "Do you happen to have a magical sword?" she inquired. "No," Naruto responded, holding it up and inspecting it. "I just covered it in fire magic." "Without chants?" "None at all." "Are you sure it wasn't simultaneous chanting?" he said, positive. Riveria was taken aback by his casual use of weird magic once more. There were no circles in sight, no chants being shouted, just the mystical force of nature, the threads of creation being manipulated, yet he wanted them to move on his whims alone. "Incredible," she said. "I hope I can study this with you in greater depth soon, Naruto." "Of course. You enjoy magic, don't you?" "Of course," she says. "It is my true love. How can you expect me to reject something so alien yet so magnificent being performed right in front of my eyes? I'm not expecting you to. It's only that I find it amusing that you are impressed by such easy magic." "Simple? You mean you have more options? For me to know, you have to find out," he joked as they heard a rumble further up the enormous corridor and saw 3 more Minotaurs sprout from the walls. "The deeper we go, the tougher they get. Are you up for the task?"
Hell yeah. Naruto put more power into the flaming sword and sprinted towards the brutes, flashing his blade and yelling a battle cry as he swiftly leapt up and lobbed the head of one of them. Riveria grumbled as she followed. His strength stats have increased again. In her delight about his powers and rapid growth, she did something utterly out of character. She didn't recognize where the 2 of them were headed. The 17th story. More Minotaurs had emerged in their thousands from the walls after Naruto had descended down the bridge into the 17th floor, but he was prepared for this and instantly went to work, taking them out by surprise, using no magic.
All Riveria could see was a light show of diverse magical skills as Naruto summoned arcs of lightning and fire with his sword and skewered Minotaurs on spears of those elements. Riveria just saw Minotaurs exploding into smoke wherever the boy went, all dropping their cores on the floor and some dropping their horns. The boy's ability to adapt and grow stronger seemed to accelerate as he killed more.
"It's just unnatural," she thought to herself as she followed him down the corridor. "Nobody should be able to progress this quickly after only a few hours of battling. It simply doesn't make sense." Naruto finally came to a halt as he used a vertical slash to cleave a Minotaur in half. The poor creature died not knowing what happened to him. Sheathing his sword, he used Snatch to pick up every core and drop item he could find before sending them to his hammer space.
To his dismay, it appeared that it was filling up from all of the things he stored in there, which meant that cleaning it out was required, which meant an entire day of sorting through everything. "Are you finished now?" Riveria inquired. "Yeah. I think I'm done for the day," he panted somewhat, "and I'm almost out of mana as well." "It was about time. I was wondering if you would be able to keep firing that magic all day. It appears that even if you don't have any magic slots, your skills drain mana." "No, the abilities do not. When I use true magic, on the other hand, I lose mana just like everyone else." "Can you use magic other than elemental magic?" "At the moment, not really." "I see. So, let us return home. I believe we're done here for the day," Riveria stated as she turned around to head back to the bridge. Naruto brushed his cloak down, fatigued from his efforts today. He'd killed hundreds of monsters today from various floors and collected an unbelievable number of cores. Once he'd swapped it all for Valis, the first thing he'd do the next morning was purchase some appropriate armor. But before he could turn away, he felt an eerie feeling in the air. Trying to find the source, he locked onto a section of the wall that looked exactly like the others, yet seemed out of place. Casting his gaze to the side a little, he saw a doorway near it, which he assumed was the entrance to the 18th floor. His pupils dilated as he recognized where he was. It was stupid of me to lose track of where we were going down here, especially since this is your first time," Riveria stated coldly as she came to his side. "What's the big deal about it?" Naruto inquired, trying to be dumb. Riveria returned her gaze to the wall before seizing his shoulder and yanking him along with her. "The monster Rex Goliath spawns at the Wall of Grief. Do you know what I'm talking about? Based on the name, I'm assuming it's some kind of boss monster?" "Precisely. The first floor boss that adventurers will encounter in the dungeon is Goliath. It's a massive level 4 monster that annihilates anything in its path with its fists and roar." "What about his howl?" What effect does his howl have? It has the ability to rip the flesh off of lower-level adventurers. Naruto, as great as you are, I doubt you could fight something like that right now. Naruto was aware of this and chose not to comment, as he was just as eager to get out of here as Reveria. Running low on mana and physically exhausted from all the beatings he'd taken from the dozens of Minotaurs he'd had to face was not an ideal condition in which to fight something like the Goliath.
I apologize for lowering you this low, Naruto. I seem to have put you in a near-death trap in order to test what else you were capable of. Don't worry, Reveria, the sooner we get out of here, the sooner we'll be able to leave. Yes, let's go. They took a more fast stroll away from the wall, towards the bridge at the other end of the corridor, and had not taken more than a dozen steps when the earth began to shake and a massive fracture emerged in the aforementioned wall. The two of them came to a halt when they noticed the gigantic behemoth burst through the wall, landing on its hands and knees before lifting its massive head and peering at them.
Run! Reveria muttered as she attempted to flee, dragging Naruto after her. Instead, Naruto tightened his grip on her arm and flew them over to the bridge, determined to reach the entrance to the 16th floor before the monster did, and the Goliath pursued them all the way down the corridor. The escape path eventually showed in their vision, and Naruto attempted to pour more magic into his flying spell to make him fly faster, as he and Reveria raced forward as they got closer and closer to the bridge. "We're almost there," yelled Reveria. They heard the Goliath roar behind them, and when they turned around, they saw it dig its hand into the wall and grab a big rock from it, hurling it towards the bridge, destroyed the stone pathway, and plugged the opening, essentially trapping the two inside. Naruto landed in time since his trajectory had been targeted for the bridge, and they both stared in fear at the entrance, their escape route shut off, leaving them in the same room as a lunatic-level boss. Naruto could see the gigantic ring-shaped shockwaves of noises rushing towards them as Goliath reared its head and screamed its terrible howl. Lifting his fatigued arm, he just in time managed to invoke full counter and fire the assault back at the Goliath. The beast shouted in pain after being hit in the face with his own attack and stumbled backwards, grasping his face. "It appears that we have no choice but to fight it, Reveria. It won't let us go easily," Naruto said. "How are you going to fight? You're only level 1, and you're almost out of the strength you brought with you into the dungeon," Reveria shouted. "We don't have much of a choice either. We must fight or be butchered like lambs. I'm more powerful. I'm going to fight it. You concentrate on finding a method to reopen that door. But you're a spellcaster. You'll never be able to finish your shouts on time. Leave it to me to worry about that. You go do what I say." Reveria yelled worriedly, brandishing her Magna Alfs, preparing to cast her spells. Goliath yelled and hit them in the stomach.
Both jumped out of the way barely in time as it smashed into the ground where they had been. Naruto, determined, utilized his flight ability and flew down to the arm, his sword drawn. He rakes a large slash down the Goliath's forearm, digging the deadly sharp blade into the skin. The monster yelled in irritable anguish rather than actual pain and shook Naruto off with its arm. Naruto leapt off the arm back beside Reveria, expecting this.
"Well, it appears that option is now out of our hands," he remarked. "You're not going to be able to fight that thing. You're not powerful enough." Reveria attempted to reason. "I really don't have much of a choice." He whispered something back to her. Goliath opened its mouth once again to howl. Naruto spotted an opportunity and used another of his talents.
Explosion. Balls of explosive magic burst out the point of his blade and detonated inside the beast's jaws, coating the inside of its maw with fire. As a result, instead of roars of misery, the two adventurers only heard guttural sounds of agony rumbling from its throat.
It was enraged at the youngster who had done this. Naruto then realized what was going to happen. Only one of them was going to make it out of this alive. He mentioned Reveria. "What? This monster is mine to kill. Are you sure you understand what that means?" Reveria looked at him as if he were insane. "What are you on about? Didn't you hear?"
"Don't interfere," he replied flatly before charging towards the behemoth.
Goliath hissed and thrust his foot out, trying to crush the youngster. Naruto sensed this coming thanks to Thread, and jumped over its barefoot and plunged his blazing blade in the meaty part of its ankle with a well-timed jump. The skin was very tough. Many times the size of the Minotaur's. Naruto had just inflicted a laceration when he cut its arm earlier. With fire magic instilled in his assault, he hoped to do better.
It mostly worked because the epidermis came way more easily, showing the tendons beneath. Goliath yelled and attempted to kick Naruto away. But the child persisted, despite the fact that it required all of his might. "Lightning King Iron Hammer!" exclaimed the king. He yelled as arcs of electricity rushed up his leg, filling the foot. The Goliath nearly dropped to its knees as its entire limb seized up, grunting in pain. Naruto leapt off the foot and went around the back, attempting to reach the Achilles tendon. By severing the tendon, the giant would lose its capacity to walk. Striking as hard as he could, he attempted to cut through, expecting it to give way. To his horror, the blade simply cut the flesh that was tightly wrapped around it. The sword slid off the tendon. Goliath kicked back as hard as it could when it sensed Naruto's presence in that location. Naruto was unable to block this strike because to the near proximity, and the kick landed directly on his torso. As he was thrown backward, the weight of a few tons slammed into his entire front region. His body slid on the ground, bouncing each time it made contact with the rocky surface.
In a fog, Naruto attempted to right himself in the air and, on the final bounce, repositioned himself and landed in a kneeling position as he skidded backward a few yards. He choked out a mouthful of blood as more dripped down his face as he came to a halt. Reaching up, he discovered this nose hurting and positioned awkwardly. "Broken," he muttered to himself. Thunderous footsteps shook the ground, causing him to look up to see the behemoth half racing and half limping. It got to him and tried to slam his fist down. Naruto dodged it by a hair's breadth due to its incredible speed. Dodging, however, did not protect him from the impact's shockwave, and he was sent plummeting again as his blindfolds filled with dust and gravel. "This is terrible. Its physical stats are light years ahead of mine. If it continues to attack like this, I'm going to get squished." Naruto was almost out of magic, and he'd exhausted himself earlier on the monsters, so he wasn't battling at full strength. There might have been no worse time for such a beast to assault. "I have 2 trump cards under my sleeve," he says. He thought to himself before returning his attention to Reveria, who reciprocated it. "But I can't risk revealing either in front of her." Goliath threw a boulder at him, capturing his attention once more. Taking to the air, he narrowly escaped it before being confronted by a massive fist. He attempted another, full counter, with his blade but was unable to draw it in time. Goliath's blow caught him and crushed him deep into the rock face. "Naruto!" shrieked Reveria, her heart pounding in her chest at what she'd witnessed. But Goliath was not finished. The lingering ache in its leg and the charred mouth reminded him how badly he wanted to torture this insignificant human. He made a fist, grabbed the small body between his fingers, and threw it down onto the floor. As Naruto was struck again on his back, blood spurted from his mouth, a small crater appeared. Goliath raised its damaged foot and stamped on top of him. Reveria slammed her staff into the ground and began chanting, her eyes flaming with fear and rage as she faced the Titan. He returned her stare with an almost leering expression. "This is my fault," she thought to herself as she hurriedly completed her mantras. "We wouldn't be down here, confronting a monster Rex on his first run, if I wasn't so obsessed on making him push the limits of his powers just so I could see it."
However, the ground began to tremble as smoke began to emerge beneath Goliath's foot. When the monster noticed this, it sought to take back its foot as it felt agony. However, it was not in time, as its foot was instantly consumed in black flames.
It yanked its foot back, screaming in agony as it moved away from the indent left by its foot. It unveiled Naruto to Reveria's gaze, his entire front splattered with blood that he spat out, his garments in shreds. This time, however, something was different.
The air surrounding him had suddenly turned very chilly, and the light seemed to decrease around him, as if he was absorbing it. His arms and other areas of his body appeared to be shrouded in a black-purple mist, while his sword blazed with the same black flames. But she couldn't tell the difference because his back was mostly turned to her.
Or, more specifically, what was on his brow? On his cheek, near his temple, a round, swirling black mark, similar to a tattoo, had developed. Except for a few fingers, his arms were coated in the same dark stuff. As it attempted to put out the flames, Goliath stomped its foot repeatedly, shaking the earth and slapping at its injured foot. "Don't even bother." Naruto spoke softly. His voice had changed, becoming darker and more malevolent. Even though his voice was soft, the air appeared to shake as he spoke. Reveria felt a cold sense of fear as the hairs on her neck rose up.
Naruto rose stiffly, displaying his other arm, which was twisted and fractured but covered from Riveria's eyes. As the arm repaired itself, darkness swirled around it. Naruto heaved his chest out a little further as he felt the shattered ribs mend themselves. "The flames of hell cannot be extinguished so easily," he replied quietly. "Please allow me to assist you."
When he lifted his arm, the blackness that enveloped it began to unwhirl and increase in number as it got larger in size. It resembled a massive fist with sharp claws on the points of its fingers. The dark hand reached out and wrapped around Goliath's blazing ankle, wrenching the foot off and dropping the burning mass on the floor. The behemoth shouted and retreated after losing its right foot. "I've never liked using this form, partly because it feels cringe-worthy and partly because it's extremely difficult to control." As the dark material evaporated and Naruto returned to his natural self, he said, "However, it's not like I don't have a few tricks left in my normal form." As pure unadulterated fury burned in Naruto's heart at what the brute had put him through, he wielded Excalibur, which was still wrapped in flaming black flames. Feeling humiliated that he had worked so hard to reach this far with all of his magic and tactics, only to be stomped on so easily and, literally, by this meat-headed, attack on Titan rip-off, before he could even employ the most basic of his abilities made his fury boil. This beast would perish. That was something Naruto vowed right then and there as he felt his strength expand once more. No more games. In general, Naruto jumped upon the gigantic leg coated in hell flames, summoning all of his strength. He dug Excalibur into the thigh and flew across it while the sword was still lodged in the flesh, using his sudden physical stat increase. Goliath shouted as the searing sword sliced through the first layers of his skin. Kicking higher, it righted its torso and slapped Naruto backward at an odd angle that he couldn't escape. The smack struck, sending the youngster falling onto the ground once more. But, high on excitement, Naruto flipped back onto his feet, tripping slightly before raising Excalibur to his eyes and charging again. This time, Goliath was attempting to stand and balance, and was on its hands and knees, ready to pull itself off the ground. Its eyes raised to observe the youngster running beneath its skin. Taking advantage of the situation, Naruto slashed vertically at the brute's lips, splitting its chin in half. The giant's agonized roars left his ears ringing and bleeding, and his perceptual vision fuzzy, but he made sure to keep his feet going. However, Thread abruptly cautioned him away from danger as his mind saw the events unfolding a split second before they occurred. Goliath, remaining on his hands and knees, dipped its chin to peer through his legs, where he noticed a toddler running through. It opened its jaws, and its lethal cry rushed towards Naruto. Rising tornado. Naruto yelled just in time, and his mana pool experienced yet another enormous drain. As the howl linked with the magical construct, a whirlwind of wind formed just behind him. This simply served to weaken the wail and negate its lethal effects. A strong gust of wind slammed into Naruto's back, sending him eating the ground, sliding on his stomach and face as grit and pebbles tore at his skin. Naruto lay there disoriented for a few seconds, his vision blurred and his senses distorted by the earlier roar. That gave Goliath all the time he needed to grow with resentment and rage. It stepped forward and kicked the ground with its stumped leg. As the youngster smashed into the wall again, the stump scraped out rock and earth, bringing Naruto with it. That's not good. As he coughed out more blood, he reflected. I'm losing my stamina and vitality. He can hit me more frequently now. Goliath, as agile and innovative as Naruto was for someone his level, was still a level 4 monster Rex. Even with its own ailments, it has the potential to outlast him in a fight. So Naruto had to accomplish this as rapidly as possible while also avoiding being hit. As Goliath's fist smashed into the rock face where he'd previously been, he rocketed up again with his flying spell.
"You're not getting me with that again," he screamed. Naruto dive-bombed the thigh he'd raked before and stabbed Excalibur with all the momentum he could muster into a specific location, with Goliath's arm overextended and thus his defenses down. The previous leg wounds of the stumped leg had been cauterized by the flames of his sword, so there hadn't been much blood flowing. The skin was thick, but the flesh was more easily harmed. As the Goliath howled in blinding pain and felt its leg turn cold from the loss of warm blood, a fountain of blood erupted from the thigh. It landed on its backside as it attempted to slap the spot where he'd been stabbed. But Naruto had long since vanished. Instead, Naruto had slid to the ground and fled behind the beast just as it was about to connect to the earth, and he'd ended up getting sat on by a 100-ton giant. The femoral artery, says the doctor. Naruto smiled excitedly. The thigh has the largest artery in the body. Any damage done to it is lethal, and with this, I can watch it bleed out and diminish progressively. It was a risk to presume its physiology was similar to that of humans, but it appears to have paid off. Massive pools of blood, gallons upon gallons, were now streaming onto the ground, so much so that Naruto briefly thought he might drown in it. So he took to the skies to get as far away from the red pool as possible. Naruto flew over to Goliath, who had collapsed with its back to another wall, and perched on it as if he were standing on it. Looking back over his shoulder, he noticed the exposed rear of Goliath's skull.
Naruto flexed his legs and shot towards the location where he'd taken down the wyvern earlier, hoping to recreate the motion and fry its brain with lightning magic. But Goliath selected that inconvenient moment to jerk its body upwards, causing Excalibur to strike a meaty area of the neck instead of the brainstem.
Knowing that the youngster's presence was indicated by the agony, it rammed its back against the wall, crushing the boy between its back and the wall. As several of his ribs crushed, Naruto felt the wind knocked out of him, but being tossed around like a ragdoll by Homura had taught him a thing or two about pain tolerance. Instead of passing out or succumbing to the desire to be utterly crushed and experience the delicious release of death, he let go of Liber, which was still caught in Goliath's back, and free dropped to the earth, lacking the concentration to fly out of there. The dumb monster understood that by doing so, it had actually drove the sword deeper into its neck, making it difficult for the beast to turn its neck since the stinging agony would prevent it from doing so. This diverted its focus away from Naruto, and it had failed to see that the boy was on his back. Naruto looked up from his seat, and he had to admit, it wasn't a nice sight. He could not only see the breadth of its back and where his weapon was embedded in the monster's neck, but he could also see its huge ass. That almost made him gag, but he forced it down since he needed to concentrate on keeping as much blood as possible. When he caught another glance of his blade, he had a brilliant idea. He also evaluated his options, as carrying out this next plan would cost him even more mana. But he was still running on fumes. Only the adrenaline permitted him to move at this stage, and if he rested too much, he would no longer be able to move, leaving him at Goliath's mercy.
Not to mention the anguish he was in right now. At this point, he was very confident most of his intercostal muscles were useless and destroyed, and his ribs were also crushed. So he wasn't exactly spoilt for choice. He raised his hand in the air and used the word, snatch, to summon Excalibur. He could have simply called Excalibur to him as the wielder and master of it, but it would not have done what he was making it do with this magical talent. The sword found him by scraping down the monster's back and unzipping the skin like a jacket to show its own ribs and muscles beneath. The shriek of the beast shook the entire middle floor. Excalibur fell on the ground beside him as, snatch, drained the rest of his mana and his brain threatened to shut down. Naruto summoned all of his fury and hatred by sheer determination. The shame he'd felt from being stepped on by this creature, the fury and hatred he felt from the suffering it had given him, and the despair he felt when he knew this beast might easily kill him if he didn't fight as he was now. With the anguish in his body as his concentration, Naruto lifted his hands and summoned the strongest lightning he could conjure at the time. Bright blood-red lightning flashed from his fingertips for the first time since Homura had given him this talent, connecting with the exposed muscles in the Goliath's back. As hundreds of thousands of volts of mystic lightning scorched its body and damaged its nerve system, the beast's scream froze and it began jerking and spasming. The strong light of the red lightning reflected off the cave walls and onto Riveria's eyes as she contemplated what this was. To the eyes of another, it appeared magical. But she was a magic scholar, and she knew in her bones that this was not magic. It was different. And far more lethal. She could literally feel the hatred and rage embodied within the terrible arcs of energy as it cooked the monster's back meat. As the crimson electricity faded, Naruto terminated the link. But he didn't waste time studying because he knew the beast was frozen, unable to move even for a split second. He plucked Excalibur from the ground. Crouching, he gritted his teeth as hard as he could, pushing all of his strength into his legs as he jumped as hard as he could. As he rose up high enough to be level with Goliath's head, the ground he left behind shattered somewhat. He performed the most powerful slash technique he'd learned from his instructor, bringing Excalibur around with a thunderous swoop. It was the same method he used to cut hills in half. The sword was expelled with air pressure and a brief flash of energy, cutting straight through Goliath's neck. The skull was severed and launched into the air, landing directly in front of Reveria with a loud thud that shook the ground around her. Naruto wasted no time in repeating the same technique to slash downwards vertically. The shockwaves pierced deep through the headless corpse until they reached and smashed the monster core within. The head remained where it was before exploding in a flurry of white smoke, as did Naruto's still standing body as he dropped down towards her. Where there was once a head, there was now a massive tooth that had fallen to the floor. A second later, Naruto landed beside it on hunched legs. When he placed his hand on the tooth, a flash of purple appeared before it was hurled into his hammer area. He looked up at her, panting heavily, with a tiny smile. "It's all over." He spoke quickly. She stared at him, blinking, unable to comprehend what had just occurred. You killed a monster, Rex. On your first run," she replied, still reeling from the experience. "Yeah. Guess I did, hee. Cough, cough, more blood heaved up from his gullet. He kept the smile on his face as he returned his glance to her. "Is that so rare?" She stood there, still looking at him. She couldn't believe what she had just witnessed. A youngster a few months shy of his 9th birthday had entered the dungeon on his first ever run and dispatched a monster Rex in one of the most violent, nasty, and terrible ways she had ever witnessed.
At the same time, she recognized that it had been essential. While she would be able to survive, the behemoth was plainly out for blood, namely Naruto's blood. She looked down at the boy in awe, surprise, and anxiety as she evaluated the consequences of these happenings.
"What have we brought into our familia?" she grumbled. "Hello, Reveria. Could you please cast some healing magic on me? I believe I require it now more than ever," Naruto stated, his eyelids drooping. Oh, yes, of course," she exclaimed before beginning to chant. Naruto was enveloped in a green glow of power as he felt considerably better, and most of the pain vanished. The ribs had healed, but they still pained when he breathed. Even though his injuries were healed, he appeared to have maintained the injury. Something for him to think about afterwards.
"Can you stand?" Reveria inquired. He tried at once and instantly began wobbling and stumbling. "No, I'm completely exhausted. Mana 0. Reveria mumbled. "Come on, let me support you. You can now collapse and sleep while I transport you back to the mansion."
"There's no way." Naruto reappeared before placing his hand on his chest and activating his force lightning once more. This time, blue lightning jolted him awake, and the lethargy vanished in his horror of the anguish he'd just inflicted on himself.
Shocking himself in order to stay awake, Reveria pondered as she examined him. Sudden discomfort is quite beneficial while attempting to stay awake. But a child should not be aware of this. "Oh, Naruto, what happened to you to make you so careless about injuring yourself?"
"Home?" Naruto inquired hesitantly. Reveria wrapped her arm around his back and drew him against her side for support. He was a terrible mess, as most of his clothes had been ripped to bloody tatters, with only his groin and the boots on his feet untouched. "Home," she said firmly as they walked back to the 17th floor's entrance. The dungeon had repaired the bridge by this point, and the boulder had been removed entirely on its own. They moved slowly and expertly to the top stories.
Naruto was on the first floor when he abruptly came to a halt. Reveria was compelled to come to a halt as she noticed him twitch slightly. "What is it, Naruto?" she wondered, perplexed by how he seemed to be searching the environment despite being blinded. The black shreds of cloth had miraculously survived the entire conflict.
Naruto's attention was drawn to a mound of little rocks, and he extended a finger. As she heard a bird-like squawk, a bolt of lightning shot from his fingertip and struck the rock pile, tearing it apart. Her identification was correct, as she spotted a little bird with scorched feathers, however the ones that weren't burned were a dazzling yellow-gold color. It looked like a burnt chicken to Naruto. It gave out another screech before vanishing in a swirl of smoke, leaving behind a golden egg. Reveria simply shrugged and continued going. She shook her head again as she picked up the egg and stuffed it into her robes. There's also a jackbird. Nothing shocks me at this point. To be continued.
That's it for this podcast, guys. Thanks for listening to this video. I hope you did enjoy this part of the story, and if you did, like, share, and subscribe for more. And thank you all for helping support. Have a great day.